Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming back. I know it's been a really long day. I don't know about you. I've had a pretty amazing day. I'm really excited about this panel for a lot of reasons. The one that unfortunately is at the top of my list is that I don't have to moderate it. I'm really excited about that. No, that's not at the top of my list, but it is one of the reasons that I'm excited about this panel. This panel are three women who are brilliant, incredibly knowledgeable about soil, and bring really diverse experience and expertise to that conversation. I think that what you're going to get this evening is a conversation about soil that is one you may or may not have heard yet. I think that they are going to provide us with a very intimate and unusual conversation. So I'm very excited to welcome to the stage Nicole Masters, Betsy Ross, and Christine Sue.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Betsy. Betsy's left ranks already.
I know this is called Sisters of the Soil, but I think a more apt name is An Evening with Betsy Ross and Friends.
Yeah. Okay, nice. Very good. So I thought we'd kick off just with some quick introductions in case some of you don't know who Christine or Betsy are, which would be remarkable, I think, in itself. So for me, I think if I ask the question, what brought me here? What is my relationship to soil? If I think back to my very earliest memories, and my parents will recall finding me in the garden, picking snails out of the shells and eating them, spending a lot of time being really interested in the garden, but in 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted, and at the time I was 5, so you can do the maths on my age. Yeah, I am that old. And it had a massive impact on me as a 5-year-old. I was so intrigued with that the earth could come out of the ground and swamp communities and kill people and just change entire landscapes. And my grandmother subscribed me to National Geographic, and it's been like a love affair of landscapes and human interactions ever since. So I studied ecology. I actually wanted to be a great white shark researcher. I'm really pleased I don't do that job now. I'm thinking really cold water, murky, and things with teeth. I'm like, no, soil is so much more exciting than great white sharks. And so, yeah, I moved back to the family farm when I was 25 as a single parent, my tail between my legs, and my dad helped me out to set up a worm farm business, so I got into vermiculture. And you know, it's pretty hard as a single parent to find work in rural communities, and so it was pretty neat that Dad could find a way to stack his enterprise. And I started making a really good fungal diverse vermicast. And some of the people that were really interested in vermicast was marijuana growers. They know that if you plant your crop in vermicast, it won't get pests and disease, you don't have to water it, and you can walk away for substantial lengths of time and then come back and harvest your crop, which is important in New Zealand where it is still illegal. Yeah, so they taught me a lot about soil, and then I met Elaine Ingham, I think in 2002, and she said soil was alive, and I'm like, no one mentioned that. That's really cool. You can do soil science at university and no one mentions the alive bit. Yeah, and so gradually I've been a very reluctant consultant, and it's just been a journey of working with people and being really committed to how do we get chemicals out of the food system on a large scale. So I did start working in community gardens, and then I got more and more intrigued with how do we communicate with large-scale cropping operations? How do we work with some of the largest ranches and stations in the world to really look at where do we get nutrient density from? How do we get chemicals out of the system, and how do we clean up our rivers and waterways? So, like, I never tire of it. So it feels like it's always evolving, like I'm never stagnant. And these days, what really fires me up is the quorum signaling, so the communication stuff, and also behavior change. What enables somebody who's in a really high input system to take that leap and start to look at how do we build resilience or nutrition, and that behavior change stuff, I think I'll never tire of that either. So that's a little nutshell. To you, Betsy.
Well, is this on?
You're on, girl.
Okay. All right. I've been doing this work for 25 years. Now, the vocabulary wasn't there for a lot of the words we talk about now, so we moved a long way. But it started out with grass-fed, Betsy Ross, grass-fed beef in Texas. They said you could not do it. You can't raise cattle grass-fed on grass. There's not enough nutrients in the soil. It just won't work. It's going to take you $513 a year for that cow to raise that calf, and for you are going to have to send it to Oklahoma or somewhere up in North Texas to finish. I said, well, we'll see about that. And I had gone back to the farm over in the Blackland. And so I had retired, or was thinking about it at that time, but I had this grandchild that was born very prematurely and was going to need a lot of help. Heard Sally Fallon talk. You know who she is? Sally Fallon, Weston Price Foundation, who told us about grass-fed beef and how important it was for health. And that was the first conversation I'd ever heard about hooking up food to people's health, really. And so here this little baby was, and Grammy was gonna come to the rescue, come high or low water.
Go, Granny.
So we started on our journey. We were very fortunate, you know, with a name like Betsy Ross, you get a little publicity anyway, and besides, everybody said we couldn't do it. Now today I brought with me, brought me, my farm manager, raise your hand, Julie Marson. And then that business, out of that business grew our business called Sustainable Growth Texas. And Brian Russ handles that for us. And how many of you are doing microbes?
Oh, should be the whole room.
Anybody doing compost tea?
Oh, wow.
All right, great. Well, in '92, we started studying about this, and the NRCS brought these booklets by that called the Soil Biology Primer that had a lot of pictures in it. And they said, here, you're kind of outside the box person. You read, we're going to give you this. And they gave me a big stack of them. They were required to have those in their office by way of settling a lawsuit with Medina Corporation, because the NRCS and AgriLife, that they were called something else then, had started a whisper campaign against him early on after World War II with his really, what we know now as compost tea in Brazos. And so this lawsuit went on forever, and they finally agreed that if they would write this book, this pamphlet, and put it in all the offices, the only thing is they didn't require them to read it. And so they were giving them out to anybody that was foolish enough to take them. It is the most requested pamphlet the government still publishes. I think the Water Board does that now. But it just like, well, this is what I need. And so anyway, people started coming. We have never really solicited clients for this, but they would be there when I'd wake up in the morning, go outside. Someone would be sitting there waiting for me, and we want you to come do what you're doing at your place. I said, well, I don't know what I'm really doing. Well, you know more than we do. And we've always been looking for something else. We've always wanted to do this, but there's been no one to teach us. This is a powerful thing, and it has started us on a journey, this child being born here in Sally Fallon. And I hope tonight the three of us can inspire you all to start your journey. If you aren't on it, we want you to get after it and get out there and get to work, because we've learned lots. We want you to understand what we're doing, but we're managing live systems. Conventional system is about sterilizing the soil and being in complete control. We want to hand off to Mama Nature and help her. I say Mama Nature because this is personal. You're going to be up front and close when you walk on those pastures and you start noticing and you start talking to the soil and to the plants, and you start trying. In our farm, we want everybody to feed everybody. Everyone that flies over, rides over, runs over, crawls over, jumps over, digs under. Everybody is invited to the table of food. And we started out as the crazy lady with the green grass. And when my son came out to work with us, he went down to the feed store to get something. And they said, "Oh, you work for that crazy lady with the green grass." And he said, "Mama, I didn't know if I should jump over the counter and whip them and say, 'That's my mom,' or if I should say, 'Well, what color is your grass?'" Anyway, it's been a real journey, and it is people understand the health benefits of this. A lot of us don't know how to do all of this. We'd love to tell you. We've got 4 educators right here of HMI that we work with a whole lot. Raise your hand there on the second row, gals.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're working hard. Anyway, this has been a journey of plateaus. And I encourage you to keep a journal of what you tried in your pasture. Not any place is like the other place, but there's some general principles. But we started out thinking it was just the biology. And then we went on thinking, oh, we got to a plateau. And thought, well, now it's the minerals. And now, so we kept on. And this last year, we're into paramagnetism and a whole bunch of stuff, and dowsing and putting a lot of good stuff out with our tea. So we are an actual service company, and with that, I'll put back on my grass-fed beef hat, and you can buy our grass-fed beef, by the way, in Austin or at the farm. Anyway, go get them, gal.
Can we just pay respect to all the elders in the room? An elder told me today that linearity didn't make a whole lot of sense to him, and encouraged me to tell my story, or to speak in stories. And I think this is a table of crazy ladies telling stories. That's basically what we're doing. So I want to tell some stories about ancestry and hunger. So my ancestry is, I'm Taiwanese, and soil and earth and nature, like heaven and earth, are actually the same thing. A lot of Taiwanese families have an altar for your ancestors, and you worship your ancestors. And by connection, you also worship the earth, because the earth and ancestry is the same thing, because often people come from the same place, and you come from the earth, you return to the earth. And I got married 8 weeks ago.
Go, girl.
Thank you. That's not the punchline, though. Okay, so I got married 8 weeks ago, and there's a 3 bows ceremony we do, where the first bow is to heaven and earth and to the ancestors and all that's contained within it. I'm not a particularly religious person, but that felt like the most true thing to me at this point in my journey. So that's ancestry that I want to pay homage to right now, and the importance of having elders to pass on storylines. And then hunger, which is really like, my story is really just a story of hunger. My first memory is actually of shoving soil in my mouth.
Yeah.
Like trying to eat it
Yeah.
and taste it.
Yeah.
And okay, fast forward 18 years, I had pretty serious food inflammation issues, couldn't digest anything, was breaking out in hives, and 10, 15 years ago, there was not language about the gut microbiome, so I didn't know what was going on. I think it was when I went to college and switched to a Western diet from what my mom was cooking, that it kind of bioaccumulated over 4 years, and by senior year I basically couldn't eat anything, so the doctors made me go on a vegan elimination diet, which I immediately divested myself from, because a world in which I don't get to eat cheese is not a world in which I want to live. So I'm in the Bay Area, so I was like sneaking out, like, you know, like Joel Salatin's Everything I Want to Do is Illegal, I was like sneaking out behind the doctor's orders to go to farmers markets, and then putting in like an array, a feast of cheese and different meats in front of myself to try to figure out what I could eat. And so that's how I got very intimately connected with grass-fed beef producers and raw dairy producers. And I was like, I don't know, I can eat the fancy, expensive stuff, but if I eat Jack in the Box for a week, I'm gonna be in hives and very unhappy. So my circle, my journey is one of gratitude to farmers and ranchers from the very beginning, of being exposed to what farming is and how people are producing food that feeds me and my loved ones and nourishes us. And then fast forward 4 more years, I graduated, went to work for the man in Asia and did private equity and built software for factories, and it's basically like exactly as extractive as you think it is. Like slept under a desk for 100-hour week, and spiritually was like very bereft of any sort of meaning. It was like, okay, well, I'm making a lot of money, but that is not the point. So I did what every private equity associate who burns out do. I went to Japan and worked on a 60-cow dairy farm as a farm apprentice, and was taken under the wing of another elder, right? So that farmer took on a lot of apprentices, and because his wife had passed and his kids didn't want to come back to the farm, but he was a holistic grazing plan, and he didn't have the words for that. I don't think he practiced HMI, but there was a chart and there was movement of the herd every day, and we moved the cows every day. And I didn't know any better. I grew up in Hong Kong and San Francisco and LA. I didn't know that there was anything other than that. So I'm like, of course, you use polywire and you move the animals when there's enough poop that they can't eat the rest anymore. And then I came back and decided that that was where, like, I don't know where we're going, I don't know anything about ag, but these are the people that I'm throwing in my lot with, for better or worse. So then I went to grad school and tried to get a degree in this, and quickly discovered there was no degree in this. So I made one up in grazing systems, took some soil science classes, and then found a very sympathetic professor who just let me do a lot of independent study following ranchers around. So that's my relationship with soil and soil systems. And then founded PastureMap, which is a regenerative grazing management software company, because I think that in the Bay Area, technology is also extractive, and it's still based on the mechanical mind. And what Sally and Esther were saying about venture capital wanting basically to extract as much value from the founders and from whatever innovation you're doing as quickly as possible is ridiculous, it's ludicrous, and change doesn't happen on that scale. And at that pace, actually, like nothing really, if you look at the number of companies that venture capital has thrown at millions and millions of dollars at, they're not making any change in the world, and they're actually not making very much profit either. But I've thrown in my lot with the regenerative crowd, and so what we think of what we're building is humanitech, and one of the biggest things that we're facing with our customers, who are the next generation of regenerative producers, is the same structural systemic barriers of land access, capital. Apprenticeship is not succession. When do you get to influence what is happening on an ecosystem, or let it influence you, or get to put down roots? Those are the same. Those challenges that are facing our customers are the same ones that we face, and so bringing my story to where we are at the present, we're really grappling with these like large systemic barriers, and where we as a company can play a catalytic role. And I don't have any answers. I just have a lot of questions.
Yeah. which I think is a really good segue into, we hung out this afternoon and went, what are we going to talk about? And then we didn't come up for air for like over an hour. Like, it's like, there's just so much that's really interesting at the moment. And I think particularly if we found ourselves in what does it mean to be regenerative, and what does that really sing to us? And, you know, if we had to get all clinical about the definitions, I think there's a step before we get to the clinical side of what does it mean to regenerate. And I think it comes from who are we being in all of this space. And I really like what you said this afternoon about space, if you wanted to do that.
Yeah, we kind of agreed that regenerative maybe shouldn't be defined because there's so much we don't know at the beginning of this movement. And where I'm seeing space right now is kind of on the human and the spirit and work side. So Deb was so phenomenal yesterday in the vulnerability and in opening space to talk about how difficult regenerative agriculture work is. And that's something that I feel very strongly because I cannot live without all of you feeding me. But you all also aren't living that well. Like I go out and I see young producers and old producers like very extractively working so hard, extractive of yourself to regenerate the earth, and that's not regenerative. So that's something that I'm sitting with. And how do we, so with the metaphor of soil needs to build some pore space, right? How do we open up space to talk about things like that? And also, how do we open up space for what hasn't been discussed, or what innovations haven't come up? And you don't know what's going to grow there. It might be a weed. It might be something really scary, microbes that we don't know what they do.
Yeah.
But I think this conference is really great at creating space.
You know, and I think a big part of this is who are we being in the face of all of this? And I think the degenerating of ourselves in that process. But that way of being is someone that is open in a conversation. And the story I wanted to share was I was out on a cattle drive, and that's like my favorite thing to do. If I wasn't doing this, I'd be moving cows all day. And a conversation had come up, and the W word got mentioned, wolves. And as I'm a foreigner, I kind of was like, oh yeah, and I heard about range riding. Isn't it interesting what they're doing? And that's all I said, right? That's all I said, honestly. Anyway, the next morning I could see cowboys were down started moving the cattle, and everyone else was kind of still getting ready, and I thought, I'll go and join the cowboys. Anyway, they bailed me up, and this guy said, I didn't sleep last night. He said, I didn't sleep a wink. He said, I'm so angry. I'm so angry at people thinking they can come here and force their ideas on us. I'm so furious. This is the Armageddon. If wolves come into Montana, this is the end of ranching. I could come into your house. I could break all the pictures on your walls. I could smash up everything you loved. That is what the wolf was. And he ranted at me for 45 minutes. And now I'm emotional about it, but I just sat there and I listened to him. And at one point I did say, hey, I think you're getting a bit emotional, but that just got more emotional. But I said to him, tell me more about that. I said, look, you know, I travel, I'm in other people's worlds all the time. I want to get your world. I don't have a right and a wrong opinion about the wolf, and I haven't lived in this landscape, so tell me about it. Anyway, he kept ranting, and he started to get calmer and calmer, and then finally I think he ran out of things to say, and he rode off. And I was like, okay, cool. And so we're riding, and I'm moving the cows, and he kept coming up, and he came up and he went, I really like birds. I'm like, okay, cool. Then he rode off. Then he came back and he's like, my wife says I don't like change. Okay, cool. And he rode off and he came back. By the end of the day, that guy was my best friend. And, and I think I wasn't making him wrong. I wasn't saying this is what I think, I'm going to put that upon your will. And I think a lot of what we do, if we look at the history of land management, through the European lens, as we come into a land, we don't ask it what it needs, and we tell it what we want our will to be. And there's very little conversation, very little letting and asking. And I think a big part of what I'm seeing with the really, really successful regenerative people are just blowing the tops off this thing, is they're asking, and they're communicating, and they're sitting, and they're being with their land. They're happy with the things that are crawling in and out and up and down, and they're just open to a listening and an observation that I think it felt like we lost, but I don't think we've lost it. I think we have it. We just need to be with ourselves and clear and open that space up where we're not in the world of urgency and we're not in the world of wrong making. And that's the hugest part for me, is the people that I see that are really successful in this space is who they be in the face of everything, and their relationships with their family and their relationships with their horse or their dog and their cows is just love. And I think if we nest ourselves in love, like Jonathan was talking about, that's where the juice is, baby. You go, honey.
What?
You go. Where's the juice?
Okay, all right. I really want to talk, though, about sustainable growth. Okay, what we did there. Energy. Energy is what this is all about, and we get there through nutrition. Whether we're in the soil, or we're livestock, or we're humans, or we're insects. What we have learned is that if we can ever get somebody to start thinking, not linearly, so that we're different compartments, but if we can get them to thinking of connecting all the dots between the plant is the grand central station, and the atmosphere and the photosynthesis process, these natural processes, are what are going to supply all the carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and what is that other one?
Sulfur. You like sulfur before.
Yeah, there are 4 of them. Anyway, maybe I said them right, maybe I didn't. But they come from the atmosphere, and if you have this process working and get it set up, and you get all of these things from the atmosphere, and we need our carbon has gotten up there loose, we need it back in the soil, because the limiting factor for the life in the soil and for the plants is the carbon. We have loosed it, if that's a word. And we need to grab it back. And we can do that by promoting the life. And then our microbes aren't there anymore. They will come. Think about what mob grazing is that a lot of us are trying to do. We're creating a biological event that is connecting all these dots. When you want to select for fungi, you're going to leave dry stuff on top of the ground. So when we come in and we graze 30% of it, trample 70, and then we have them stay just a little while on it so they can, fertilize with all that fine organic fertilizer. We have created a very wonderful biological event, and we supplied life, the life in the soil with food, and with the right kind of food. If we want to go bacterial, like for a garden or a row crop, then we are going to want to leave green things on top and work them in a little bit. And Mama Nature heals and uses all of these things through the food supply. So the nutrition, we can control what happens in the way, or influence it really, by what we feed and the compost we make or use, and that we constantly change, so that we're always getting more species and feeding more species of soil organisms and insects, and everybody eating everybody else. Now, for instance, how many of you have flies on your cattle? Anyone have flies on cattle? Sure you do.
Anyone who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Who doesn't?
Well,
that would be negative.
No, that would be positive.
That would be positive, right. Yeah. Anyway, what we have found is that if we can get sulfur in the plant, we don't have flies, just like that. And we have 120 paddocks with our grass-fed beef. And when we treat them differently, really it's become a research farm that we try different things on. And if we are trying most of and we're into weeds a whole bunch too, and think that they are a good thing. And if you don't like them, then you need to understand why they're there, and you need to take over their job and skip over do what they're trying to do if you don't want them. Because they are so powerful at accumulating the nutrients and the traces and the major components of the soil and giving back to the soil. That's the sustainability part. But carbon is the limiting factor at the same time. But we can treat some of these pastures, feed the microbes the right form of sulfur, and we can get that into the plant. I can move them across from the road where we haven't done that to the paddock over here on this side of the road that is fixed and no flies. Now that's powerful. How much time, what do flies do? Nutrition, this is all about nutrition and letting the energy of natural processes help you. And we always say, if you're going to grow grass, you got to let the grass grow. Now that's pretty profound, really. So profound. Think what all we do to keep the grass from growing. We work hard. The South Africans come and they say, you guys work so hard to do so much you don't need to do. Our friend Ian Mitchell-Lyons is really good about that. But anyway, all of these things is a different way to look at it, and it's predicated on life. And it's predicated on natural processes that are there for us. And so, it can be scary. And when we first started, people would throw pot shots at us, just call me up on the phone and tell me how dumb I was. And I'd say, well, finally I thought, why are they doing this? Do I know you? I go to school. Did I hurt your feelings sometime or something? No, I just don't understand why you can be so stupid as to keep an animal for 26, 28 months when you could make more money putting it in a feedlot and selling it 14 months. Well, I happen to want to have a different eat. I'm into food, and that's where the grassroots action is going on now. And you've got to learn some about promoting life. Everything you do, you should ask, am I killing something? What is the unintended consequences here? Mm-hmm. And learn about all of that. Mm-hmm. It's not a philosophy of doing nothing. It is a philosophy of managing everything. And a good grazer is necessary to promote this once you get it going. I think most of you do that, would agree to that.
Can you tell us what you told us earlier about weeds and weed succession?
Weeds. Okay, everyone have weeds? All right. Why are the weeds there? People kept telling me they're competition, Betsy. The chemical guys write that, to be sustainable, you want to get rid of the weeds. Then you'll have that wonderful social lifestyle where you can sit on the front porch and watch the grass grow. And they won't have any cobalt. And they won't have any Molly B. And if you have heart trouble, they're going to give you vitamin B12. Well, that plant has a vascular system. That tree has a bigger vascular system. Think of the pump it takes to get things through the roots or through the stomata where we can get gravity flow going downward from the leaves, but to come back up and deliver, we need clean vessels. That is vitamin B12. You have to have cobalt to do to get vitamin, let the animal, the ruminants, synthesize vitamin B12. Wouldn't it be great if we had that in our beef? I bet you anything it's in my beef. Is it what's in your pasture? Is it sort of thing. So anyway, we look at weeds as being, telling us, helping us read the land. The two things that we're most deficient in are magnesium and sulfur. Sulfur is the first trapdoor on the biosequencing process. If you don't have enough sulfur in your grass for the photosynthesis to work, it is always a workaround. You never get the full benefit of everything else you are doing. So how do you get that in there? You set up the delivery system with the microbes. You're going to pay attention to what you're feeding. You're going to promote diversity, and you're going to get out of the way and say, "Go get them," you know. And you're not going to play "you die, you live, you die, you live." If you're so out of balance that nothing but sunflowers will grow, you do need to mow them down. But leave the roots there for all the food and the critters in the soil. It's an amazing, if you'll study that, that's an amazing thing to start looking at the value of the weeds. You can't buy what Texas groundsel will do for you. It's toxic. It's that damn yellow weed, they call it. Excuse me for saying that, but that's what they call it. I thought that's what it was for a long time. And the animals won't eat it. But it's giving you stuff you could not afford to buy. And if you have a live system there, you can get it into the soil, and the plant can take it down, feed the microbes, wake those guys up, and so they say, oh, we haven't had any cobalt. We've been lying here for 100 years now without anything on the sideline. We get to get out on the playing field. You smell it? Do you feel it? That sort of thing. And here they come up. They say, ooh, and here they go, because they have what they need to help fix the soil. Nothing is frivolous in the soil food web or any of this Mama Nature business. You need to pay attention to it and respect it. And it is, life is the golden thing. Just life. Don't kill things just to kill them. And people say, well, it's competition. It's not. It's a community. It's a community. People come and say, but Betsy, your weeds are hogging resources. Nah, we look at that as a community affair. They're helping. I'm figuring out what I need to do to jump past them if I don't need them, but I'm inclined to let them have their day and help me, sort of thing. Is that what you want?
Yes, I think it bends my mind to think of everything Betsy talks about in terms of community, like everything she talks about soil, to apply to our community as humans, right? Because we are in a network, and we've heard the mycorrhizal fungi network metaphor used a lot. But I think that's a fairly new thing that I'm hearing in our community, to talk about ourselves like soil. And so, did you notice that Betsy says the same thing to her weeds as she said to me? She's like, I'm getting out of your way, go get them, girl, right? Like, getting out of your way, go get them. Yeah. We need to make space in our community. So I think of myself as a weed. Because
no, you're not. You're a precious
I am a precious being. Thank you. I'm precious weed. Yes, but you love your weeds, right? So when I walked in, so let me tell you something about being a weed, right? So 5 years ago, I walked in, having been an apprentice, loved my farmer, walked into a ranching conference, and nobody looked like me, right? Like, it did not look like this room. And I walked in like 300 cowboy hats and big belts and like very kindly looking elder gentlemen. And to my delight. Like, they welcomed me with open arms, right? And the community really has shifted year after year to be more and more inclusive. But I still have the physical imprint of what it's like to be the only person who is, it was like it wasn't just that I was Asian, but I was also female and young. And you could also count the number of young people and the number of women on like one hand at that conference. And we're making strides, right? But we also make space for people that we don't know what they're doing. I was like, I'm here to build apps for grazing management. That's not, they know how to mentor someone who is going to be an apprentice. You want to learn how to ride? You want to learn how to handle cattle? Technology, I don't really know what to do with that. But to Betsy's point that weeds are bringing nutrients that we didn't know we needed and reaching to different levels, reaching different spaces that were inaccessible previously. That is the kind of mentality that I think we need. And in California, in like the tech world, diversity inclusion is pretty terrible as well. But the conversation shifted from diversity to inclusion to incorporation. So diversity is recognizing there is a problem and that we need diversity to thrive, right? So diversity is, I need cover crops. Okay, I need to not monoculture anymore. I recognize that cover crops are going to be better for my soil. Inclusion is actually no-till drilling the cover crops in, and they're included in your rotation. Incorporation is actually having that thrive in your system. So having 60 different species thriving in your system and each of them getting fed. So that's the question that's kind of going in my mind is, Betsy, I'm hungry, right? Betsy keeps talking about feeding. So how do you awaken, how do we attract the people, the microbes that we don't even know what they do into our community? And I think it's about setting the table. Like how do we set the table? How do we provide the food that folks that are not us are hungering for?
Should we have a random subject?
Yeah.
I'm getting a bit of trolling on Twitter, something about leaving Twitter. It's quite an unpleasant social media space. But one of the things that's really freaking people out at the moment is the possibility that glyphosate will be banned in the next 2 years. Don Huber is saying 2 to 5 years it will be banned. What that makes me think, which is great, but what will people do if glyphosate is banned? I assure you they're not going to start going organic and cover cropping. It would be great if they did, right? But the thinking out there is very fearful and very knee-jerk right now, and it's how do we start shifting that mentality from the kill and that this is causing economic harm to what is it that these weeds are trying to indicate? And it's such a big mind shift. Like, it's so different from the current mind shift of control and dominate and kill. But I'm working on operations that we're down to at least 50% of the glyphosate they were doing. We're no longer doing post-emergent sprays, or if we do a little bit of post-emergent sprays and 0 desiccants, 0 pesticides, 0 fungicides. And I think there are stepping stones to transition people through that process, but it's very much like starting to ask these questions of what are these weeds trying to do? How do we start doing them out of the job? So it's cool to talk to Betsy because we've been doing the same stuff, which is take a tissue test of a weed that's in your field, take it with the grass that you're wanting to grow, and look, where are they significantly different? And you'll find that those weeds often are very high in trace elements, or they'll be high in, say, calcium or magnesium or whatever, and start to listen to what they're trying to tell you if it is a problem. But one thing that I do see is that as we start to change our management, that the soils become flocculated and they open up. And then what can be released is things like potassium. Now, potassium, if you have high potassium, sends a signal to broadleaf weeds to germinate. So people often freak out because year 2, suddenly they got kochia, or suddenly they've got a whole lot of dandelions, or they've got thistles, and they're like, it's just nature just taking hold and starting to create a balance. And we've got to be able to give ourselves that freedom to surf that wave and just go, okay, this is actually part of the natural healing process. But I think if we're not communicating that, because that can be part of our failures, of being able to communicate that with the neighbours in terms of this is actually part of the healing process. And a big part for me in terms of these transition tools is the use of the humics and the fulvics, because one thing that they do is they buffer chemicals. So on some properties I'm going into, they've had heavy use of things like atrazine or glean or paraquat or whatever it is. the humic will actually bind to those substances so that you don't get a flush of chemical to your crop. One year, an oats crop producer followed his program, but he didn't put the humic into his nutritional programs. And the only thing that was missing was the humic. Up comes this oat crop, and suddenly it just keeled over and it died, and he lost the entire crop pretty much. He sent off leaf samples, and it was full of atrazine, and he's like, where's the atrazine come from? 6 years earlier, that atrazine had been applied. By starting to flocculate, the biology's building that soil, suddenly it released and flushed atrazine to the crop, and he lost the crop. So we're starting to think, how do we feed, how do we support this system in transition? Because people can have some train wrecks in this if you're not kind of supported. And one thing I like, listening to Betsy is, how do we follow in the footsteps of the person in front of us if we're walking through a minefield? Because there are some minefields out there, and I know people have lost livestock or had issues or just had total train wrecks because we start getting excited about something and we go, okay, we're going to pull the spray program, or we're going to start going into, like I met a guy that did he heard that 90-day rotations are what you're going to do. So he put all of his livestock onto 90-day rotations. He nearly killed them. They look like the Humane Society needed to go and pick up those animals. And it's like, no, transition, buddy, transition. So it's like trying to find these tools. And I think part of that is how do we support each other in this community to kind of go, there are traps to avoid. There's things that can be risky. This isn't no risk. I personally think it's a lot less risky than what people are currently doing. But yeah, how do we support through that transition? Because there's some big changes coming that are really shaking up the industry, and I'm very excited about some of those changes, but yeah, how do we support people?
I'm super convinced that sharing failure is a really big part of this, and sharing knowledge. I again think that what Deb did was so tremendous, right? It takes a lot of guts to come up here and be somebody that a lot of people look up to and talk about failure. And that's something that we don't do enough in general, because everybody in this room who's a producer is an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. There's a lot of small business owners here, and you're just everything's supposed to be awesome, right? And then you come, and it's and this is a family reunion, and this conference can feel there's this positive energy to see each other and to be well, and people want you to be well so much, right? And it's really hard to share things that aren't going well. And the analogy that I used was composting, because Betsy said that, she said something earlier today about weeds pulling up energy and distributing it to the layer that needs it the most. And I had never actually thought of it. I knew that, right? I knew it cycled nutrients, but I've been thinking so much about root exudates, and I'm like, oh, we're pulling down carbon, and we're putting sugars, and we're feeding the deep, the soil. It's all about the soil. But also, weeds are pulling up things, and then they're decaying in order to feed what needs it most. And I think sometimes at the surface layer, what we need to do is share vulnerability and compost our failures. And what Deb did was turned a failure into something that resonated with 500 people, and the energy that created is something that we don't measure currently in society, and we don't measure in our community. What the energy is when you share, I failed from this, let me share this with you so you don't fail from it, or so that you feel like you can let go of some of that pressure that's on your chest, and together we will be more resilient, together we will rise better from that.
Also, when you're trying to...
Yeah,
sorry. When you're trying to complex with humates, use humates to complex your glyphosate, and it's kind of like if you were at a roping and you tied them down. The humates are going to tie down all of the toxins, and then you're going to brand them, but instead of that, you're going to put out the right microbes that can take care, break those compounds apart and recycle them. And we call that our detox potion, or detoxing it. And we will always do that mix when we're ready to, when we start a project that has been heavily sprayed and all. If you have a 7,000 or 5,000 stalkers like mob grazing, and you've got that down, lots of things can happen because that's a lot of humates. Humates are 65% carbon. You know, they're that layer, and so you're putting out a lot of excess carbon that has been worked over by the biology, the bugs, and it's a reserve, and it comes from the era when the dinosaurs, all the vegetation that decomposed, and I don't know if the microbes were there then or not, but
of course the microbes were there.
I'm sure there were to some extent.
Time.
And so you're learning to use different things. You don't want to feed the same thing to anybody. You don't like the same thing all the time. Sometimes you want more, sometimes you want less. So you've got to learn to rotate these things. And when you are grazing, you want to rotate graze sometimes in the springtime your big grasses, and other times you want to wait till they, you want to wait till they get brown and they become more fungal. They have more up here, up in the top, promoting their seeds, and then they're feeding their roots. So you can mix things up like that just by management. If you think, okay, what do I need? What am I trying to accomplish here? I need the big tall grasses. That's what I want. I've got to have a lot of forbs that are going to bring the traces and bring all of the everything up from the earth, from down deep, pull it up through the roots, take it to the top when that plant dies down. If you have a live system, it's going to shred it, break it apart, and say, okay, here you go again, ready to do. We've raced the board. Now we're going to start over. And when that plant has dropped the seeds, now we have everything we need for that, and we go again. And we have to respect that, and that's what we're trying to set up. So then you figure, okay, how can I use my cattle at the right place? I know how to mob graze. I know what they can do. Now, when am I going to put them in that trouble spot? When am I going to put them in that fragile place? If I'm on sand, and I put them just on KR blue stem that has a little old bitty sharp root that's just covering the soil to grab some, to keep the soil from being bare, then I can't stay real long, can I, if I'm on sand and doing that? I have to be careful. So I might not put my big herd on all of that fragile land and bring it along a little bit more. And I'm sure that Deborah in her talk said she moved them sometimes 2 and 3 times a day, that she has that in mind. I know the good grazers always just instinctively are doing some of this kind of thing. So don't be afraid to try things and then write it down what you did, see the effect 6 months later or the next growing season. And don't forget to let it grow. You can't take everything down to the nubbin all the time.
30 minutes.
Who here's got cheatgrass? Who got any cheatgrass in the house? Oh, not that much. That's kind of interesting. Well, you don't want to put your hand up. Starting to look at really what are these dynamics behind some of these invasive weeds is really interesting, and so there's some really good papers around what's happening with cheatgrass. So it feeds archaea, like it feeds the most simple of bacteria in its root systems. It really is, and some of those are allelopathic molecules. It's trying to actually outcompete your grasses, but it's a very bacterial environment. It's telling you that phosphorus is not very active. So starting to really dig deeper into what some of these indicators are in terms of how does that reflect on our management, I think is really, really key. And I think we're seeing some of this spread, you know, like, I don't know what it is in North America now, but the cheatgrass thing is getting pretty crazy, and it's all part of that fire cycle, and I don't know, but starting to really start to think about what is it trying to tell you.
We have 30 minutes. Do we want to leave half an hour for questions?
It's 30 minutes to go. Yeah. Holy, time flies when you're having fun. I just wanted to think about livestock and how we can use livestock as part of our biological carriers. So we're doing things like we're putting like high fungal compost actually into trough systems so the animals are actually drinking it. We're testing that compost first so it's got no salmonella or anything in it or E. coli. We're also using humates, free choice humates. So animals, when they take those humates, it actually relaxes the villi of the gut. So if you've got animals that are like flushing nutrient, you've got high protein or something like that, the humate can help buffer and tie onto that. It increases your feed efficiencies, but you put humate through manure and the dung beetles just go through the roof. And so we can have free choice, raw humate, and also putting seed out with your mineral and start to just get some of these areas that we don't have a lot of ground cover. If you put some of these hard-coated seeds, they go through a cow really well, and people are like, oh, you can't put grass seeds because they won't go through the cow. It's like, yeah, because that's why grasses grow like this with their seeds, because they don't go through the cow. Anyway, so we've had some really good success, and we're getting strikes up on like really bony rangeland, and we're getting things like chicory. I'm a big chicory fan. Chicory and plantain and alfalfa and some of those grasses going through cows really well. So starting to think of your cattle actually as your microbial carriers into some of these areas, I think is really good. We were just thinking, because we've only got half an hour, are there any questions that you'd like to specifically ask, or is there something else you wanted to add? We've got flying mics if anyone's got a question. Steph?
I've got a question. Where we are, we've got kudzu invading, we got Japanese honeysuckle, and a few other bushes and things, a multiflora rose that the government brought us in the 50s. And all those things are foreign to our environment, so they tend to take over areas. So how do you feel about destroying the invasive species that are really, and honeysuckle is aleotropic, so our native species don't come up?
Welcome to the new natives, buddy. But start to look at what the biological community is. And so if you think about a lot of those woody weed species, they like soils that we call kind of sleepy, or they're fungal dominated, not these bacterial dominated ones we're talking about. So if you're seeing some of these woody type weed invaders, have a look and see, are you getting really good animal impact, or are your fields quite large and you're not getting even coverage with cattle? Like, I'd be looking to some of that first, and for some of those perennial species, you're going to have to come in and be a bit aggressive with them and then get your management on top of it. But it is interesting seeing these exotics coming in because they don't have their natural predators, obviously, and things like that. So there are biocontrols for some of these, but we've got to look first and foremost at where in your management are you giving it an opportunity. So I think of everything that I see on people's properties as like your fingerprints. And so what fingerprints are you laying all over the land? How does that reflect on what might be happening? Just because there's weed seed doesn't mean they're going to germinate. They've been given a germination signal. All right, what's that signal? What am I doing? How can I do them out of a job? But yeah, thanks for the question. Did you want to add, Betsy?
Yeah, I think the invasives, if they get completely out of control, like in Texas, in South Texas, we have guinea grass, buffalo. Anyone from down there fight the guinea grass and all of that? No. But it is, they actually delete calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. They just, break down the secreted acid that breaks down the compounds. And so they have, free reign. There are no boundaries on it. And we throw some weed killer on it, and we kill more of the biology that could come back and defend against that. So it depends upon, where you are or what you do on that. But what we are trying to do with guinea grass and some of those invasives is we're trying to say, okay, you got them, you deleted what we needed, we're going to come back and we're going to send out with our wonderful microbes, we're going to send some magnesium and sulfur and what you have just taken away, and we're going to jumpstart this. And we're going to put some boundaries on you, bucko. We want to have natives because they work better in a community. And these invasives are just, they destroy communities. And they are just hogs, and they're takers and not givers. All of the natives give back as well as take. And we want that kind of community, don't we? So we're going to get it that way. So I would do that in my mineral mix or in licks. Pat Colby suggests licks to do a lot of that. But their oxalates are what they are. So they're very hard.
Was that another question?
There's a question over here.
I'd like to ask a question about...
Here comes one.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question about invasive brush. I'm a rancher in South Africa, very brushy country. We've had, in wetter years, incredible die-off of invasive brush. And think, wow, this is looking really, really good. And in certain areas, we're getting, in a dry cycle, we're getting incredible germination or reinvigoration. What looked dead has a little tuft or something, and that's growing again. Have you got any advice, comments, how that's happening, why that's happening, and how to sort of keep back the reinvigoration in the dry times?
So I imagine, Wayne, that you've got really good impact at your place. Like you're getting good animal heavy impact and recovery. Yeah. So I would do these plant tissue tests that we're talking about and have a look at that. What's causing that germination signal, especially if you kind of see plants where you get a dry spell, and are they germinating after a dry spell, or are they germinating when it's dry? Like, is it the water that's a trigger?
In a dry cycle.
Yeah.
In a dry cycle, there seems to be a trigger.
Yeah.
So if we get 2 or 3 years in the dry, it's obviously not completely dry, but it's a drier. In the wetter times, we're having a great effect. In the drier cycles, the brush is really reinvigorated.
There could be something that you're missing too. Like if you think about a lot of our ecosystems, we're missing some of those native deeper rooting systems. You think that might be happening too? Like it's taking a niche, and if it's getting really competitive when it's dry, its rooting system's obviously getting down, and I'd want to keep looking at that because there's probably a couple of microbial issues going on too. But Africa, we know you've got really good base saturation. I suspect you've got good calcium, good magnesium.
Yeah, it's complex, obviously, but there's a trigger we're looking for. Yeah.
There's a trigger, yeah. So I would do that testing, like a mineral test, your microbial test, your tissue test, and start to see where's the pattern, what is it trying to do. But yeah, I mean, this is the issue with these foreign invaders, is they don't have any biocontrols.
Can you both talk more?
Oh, these are natives, right, okay.
Can you both talk more about reading the land and listening to what it wants to do? To Jonathan's point today about hearing what the land is trying to get to instead of what you're trying to make it happen.
Let me just say real quickly that Tracy, raise your hand. She's from South Texas and has been combating some guinea grass. You want to visit with her afterwards?
Yeah, okay.
It's amazing.
Hi.
Hi.
One of the big invasives we deal with, and I think it's pretty common in New Mexico, is snakeweed or broomweed. And I'm really curious, I can't find a lot of information. Apparently it has hundreds of known chemical compounds. I would like to hear more about how you approach reading that and skipping over it. I really like that thought of understanding what it's trying to do and then moving past that. And also in a brittle environment, how you think about transitioning from bacterial to fungal dominance. Thank you.
All right, so he's saying that snakeweed and how do you find out what some of these things are indicating, and then in a brittle environment, how do we shift from bacterial to fungal?
Yeah, we use Cornell Dairy One lab to do tissue tests, and that's what we build our database on. And what we find is that that grass or forb or weed, whatever you want to call it, doesn't come unless it has a job to do, unless it's an invasive. It doesn't belong here. It doesn't have any checks and balances on it. So you have to take a little different mode and kind of do reverse engineering in what you're putting together in it.
But the brittle question, fungi actually hold on very well in the dry. So bacteria can produce waxes, which is why we see those non-wetting hydrophobic soils when it gets really dry. But in brittle environments, the fungi can still hold on pretty well. So if we're seeing a lack of active fungi in that system, it's possibly because it's some kind of management. So something's historically happened, like maybe it's been overgrazed, and then look at how do we get that back in. So one of the things we do that's really fun, and it depends if you've got the ability to spray stuff out, is we make weed concentrate. So it's a good thing to get the kids to do during summer holidays, is go and harvest some thistles. Bad boy, whatever they're doing. All right, so they can harvest big barrels of thistles. You don't add any water, you just let that stuff break down until it turns into a substance kind of like Marmite, which you people don't know what I'm talking about, but you know, like mushy Marmite. And that concentrate we can actually spray back onto the land, and it concentrates your trace elements, but it also concentrates the diseases and pathogens that take out that specific plant. So we've been doing that for years, and we get really good results with it. Yeah, and there's a whole lot of science, I guess, behind doing some of those weed brews. So if it's just a patch, then you could just make a brew that you could go and spray out. But I know some of you don't have the ability to spray things. But I also like to say that that might be part of our mindset, is what is possible to do on some of these landscapes where we haven't been doing things. And in brittle landscapes, you've got to watch, like, not doing anything, like trying to leave your recovery longer, because sometimes that can actually go the opposite way of what you're wanting to do. But sorry, we're going to get hooked on weeds, aren't we? Everyone loves weeds. How do you kill it? How do you kill it?
I just want to add something on. I was reading Charles Massey's book, Call of the Reed Warbler, on the way over here, and one of the lines that stuck out to me a lot was he was talking about Australia and the song lines and the history, ancestry of how Australia was shaped by imprints of humans, right? The Australian Aboriginals, and this drawing back to this point of every human and animal and everything has left its imprint. Layered, and you know, if not on the actual physical soil layers, also on the imprinted memory of the soil through bacteria and through epigenetic memory, right? And so in order to know what the land's trying to tell you, there are clues in the past, and there are the clues that you must look to in ancestry, or not your ancestry, the ancestry of the land and what was there. And also, these raise some challenging questions. Like one of the questions I've been wrestling with as a beginner with the learner's mindset, right? Like we'll go to some of the ranches and it looks like the ranch wants to be jungle. And it's like, well, I don't know what is actually regenerative here? What does the land actually want to do? Yeah. And there's forest. We talked about forest that's dying with beetles, and like, does some of that land, like in California where I'm from, the land wants to burn, right? Like, and we can have a conversation about fire, but it happens, and that's in the land memory. And I just think that cattle, as miraculous as they are, like we only started doing this a little while ago, and then we only started reintroducing multi-species stacking a little while ago, and now there's silvopasture, and now there's like archaeological evidence that there were hazelnuts in coastal California, where nobody has grown hazelnuts for like 100 years, but there's evidence there that hazelnuts once used to thrive. And so what kind of ecological system was actually there? Is that somewhere imprinted in the land's memory? And those are questions that I'm like not hearing those questions get asked that often about what's possible and what is regenerative beyond grazing in a circle and adding pastured poultry. Like, that's why I thought Reginaldo's talk was so electrifying, because like, what about hazelnuts? What about mulberries? What about vertical canopies? There's a lot in regenerative that we can build up and vertically that I think we're not asking those questions yet.
And I know I'm a foreigner, but I'm always interested in what would this landscape have looked like before we were here. And unless you're in a desert, these landscapes had green cover on them in summer. So you go to California and people are doing like holistic management with bare ground for 6 months. And it's like, I don't think that happened. And if you look back, in 1880, there was a 2-year drought, and at that time there'd been like common land grazing, and people grazed and grazed and grazed, and over 1 million livestock were lost during that period. That's not including the elk and the deer and everything that died. Like, it was an apocalypse, that drought. I talked to a guy I'd been talking to, a paleobotanist. They discovered through these lake bed records that over 400 species had become extinct in that 2-year period that have never come back again to California. And it's like, What are those 400 species? Where are those forbs? Where are those grasses? Like, we've lost so much and we don't know what we've lost. And if you've got bare ground in summer, it's not because it's dry. It's because you're missing something that's not in that ecological niche. And if we have bare, dried up soil, we can't build carbon. We're not feeding biology. We're not feeding fungi or bacteria. Like, that system's shut down. And so I think these questions of asking of the land, doing some research, are there photographs? Is there something from, like, did Lewis and Clark go over your ranch? Because he did on a couple of properties I work on. So we can actually go, holy, there used to be grass. Like, I was working up the top of Turner. All that they're growing is moss, like moss. And they've got records where there was grass up to a horse's belly. Okay, what have we done? How do we start looking at reclaiming that back? And in part, the grazing isn't going to get us there because there's nothing to graze, right? And you can't put, some of these operations are like 14,000 acres. You can't put round bales over all of that. What is that trigger? How do we get that system starting to tick over? And that's what gets me excited.
Betsy, Betsy went to public libraries to try to find the answers, right?
Yes.
You were asking questions like, we all need to be Betsy in 1992, is what I was saying. Like, because there wasn't Cow Save the Planet, and there weren't all these manuals, and there weren't a bunch of conferences to go to, and Betsy just like went and figured this stuff out. Can you talk about how you went and tried to find history?
Well, when we first started in 92, you could get a 10-pound bag of humates in Texas. You could buy that. So we had to get truckloads from all over. It cost so much to get it shipped here, and we had to vet all of that. Now we can buy humates, but you need to get, we like the New Mexico humates, by the way. Mesa Verde mine here in New Mexico is who ships to us. We also get basalt and use some of the paramagnetic rocks. We have a young man that vets that for us up in the east, and we get truckloads from them and add that energy back in our formulas, sort of thing. But it was the conversation, it was hard. You couldn't find anyone talk about this. Where do I get this in early 90s? But I'd never had the conversation. We were doing experiments, and my brother came down, my partner, and he said, for goodness sakes, whatever you do, don't do the whole farm. We'll go broke with these experiments. And then the NRCS came out and said, oh my gosh, we have never seen nodules on clovers like this. Where? What's a nodule? And, you know, people would hear about us, and they'd come and they'd say, you know, you can't do that in Texas. And we said, oh, okay. Well, can we see the cattle? Well, yeah. So we go down there, and they say, oh, my God, go get the camera. And I said, what are you looking at? You know, what did we know? Sort of thing. And they said, well, look at the fat pone. Look at the brisket. What am I looking for? You know, look at the feathers. And then Gerald Fry got a hold of us, and Malcolm Beck came, and Howard Garrett. All these people just appeared, and we're saying, we heard what you're doing. How can we help? People have been so nice to us. I don't know if it's because we have a name like Betsy Ross, or we just looked like we needed so much help, sort of thing. And then we had these other groups that were coming and saying, you know, you can't do this, you're a fool for, why would you want to keep, you know, you can make more money doing something else. Well, that's not my goal. You know, that wasn't my goal. My goal was to feed my precious grandchild the best nutrition possible, because I wanted him to develop to his fullest.
Betsy, can you speak a little bit about the resilience of the landscapes you've done down in Texas along the coast, especially in light of...
Yes, my conversation has changed. She asked, is it resilient? Have we had projects or places where we've seen the impacts last for a while? Because they all say, oh, we can make it look pretty for a while or make it do right for a while, and then it reverts back. But we've got projects that, like in Harvey, granted this was a park, It was highly trafficked. A lot of vegetation was underwater for 4 days. It'd been underwater off and on. It was a basin. We lost 2 iris bushes and 1 tree all that time. None of our projects washed away in Houston during that flood. And the biology secretes a glue that holds the sand, silt, and clay together. You got to understand that. So think, how can I use that little sucker? He's going to do that. You know, let's solve some problems. And we are now talking, it's not whether this stuff will work or not, putting life back into the soil. It is, we're long past that. It is resilient, it is tough, can be basic. You have to have the right tools to do this. We are pouring the carbon in first. We are adding the bukus of trying our best to get the very best mixes of compost and the microorganism. We use an extractor. Instead of brewing the tea and waking everybody up, we have a machine that extracts them off. By definition, compost is 15% active and the rest inactive. It's already reached homeostasis. And so we strip that off, and we want to make sure that we give enough food out there. We come back and feed that biology, and we're trying to head off the problems that happen when you miss the elements. The basic elements aren't there or aren't available. We want things that are insoluble, that when triggered become available. We want the plant in charge, Mama Nature in charge, and we want to, most of all, not block that energy. Because I can take the same 4 ingredients and mix them in a different order, and I tell you, I can go from defense to offense in a heartbeat just by doing that. So we have to learn how to do that. And by the way, we are pretty good dowsers. It's a wonderful ancient art that you dowse too. Should have known. So,
what else would
anyway,
you do? I mean, really.
It's such fun to have conversations with these young ones, because we've been out here doing this, kind of hanging out by ourselves in a way, but we've been working. Instead of talking about it, sometimes we say, we're not just talking about it, we're doing it. You know, so give us a call. Just costs money. Sort of thing. But no, it's a powerful tool. Powerful tool. You can do it a lot of different ways. We don't know all the ways yet. You young people, need to figure out a lot more about this. You ought to go get them. You're going to do it. All of you all out there. It's important. Health is important. And these animals we eat, you know, that's hard because we identify with them. Walking on the land, I mean, I get an energy. And if you're walking on your land that is alive and it has energy in it, it draws you. You don't want to leave. If I get to a place, and sometimes people say, can I just lie down out here? Go to it. You know, if you want to sit down out here in some of these places, how many of you have places like that on your land? Of course you do. Good. Those are good spots. That's what you want to mimic, because it is healing. If you have an old horse, you go sick, you go tether that horse in that spot. If you're not feeling good, pull off your shoes and push it around there and sit there for a while. You know, just be one with nature. Yes, sir.
Why do you think the scripture said ashes to ashes and dust to dust?
Why did they say that?
Why did the scripture say that instead of soil to soil? Maybe they meant soil to soil.
Well, down into the basic elements. That's how you get to the basic elements in a lab, is the berm. I mean, it's ashes. I don't know that they meant ash from a tree that's in the leaves. But see what your animals eat. Your animals will tell you exactly what's missing. Watch what they eat and watch their poop and see what's happening there and what's the insects on them. And when insects come, armyworms come and want to wipe you out, well, Mama Nature's saying, yoo-hoo, yoo-hoo, bucko. I don't want anybody eating this. Anybody, not my, I will just have special insects and microbes that can eat this. That's what I built them for, but you're not going to eat it. It's not good enough for you. It doesn't have the nutrition. I'm going to take it down. And then when the armyworms take down the leaves and they fall on that hot land and they melt because they're filled with chlorophyll, we got to have chlorophyll because it has magnesium in it. Yay, yay. And it's going to make all of that. And then the grasshoppers come. And they say, okay, Mama Nature says, get after the stems. We got to take this down. We got to erase the board, so to speak, take it back to its elemental form, let it fall on the ground. If that doesn't all work, then here come the termites. Oh boy, I'll take a termite any day over a earthworm. And because I love, we're working with perennials mainly. And those guys take it back down. I mean, they race the board. And what comes back first? What comes back first? Always something that's loading up the ground with calcium, because you need calcium to have life first. You can't have life without your calcium. And here we go again. Yeah. We're going to do something else. So be aware of what's going on.
And what I think is really neat about that, and like for 20 years we've talked to farmers about things like we see less insect attack, or we see less frost, or we see less diseases. There is so much literature out there to support this now that it's not anecdotal anymore, which I think is really, really cool. But we shouldn't be waiting for science on any of this anyway. They are, like, I think Peter said it before, or maybe it was Richard Teague, yeah. They're 30 years behind where we are anyway. I mean, they're playing catch up real fast, which is why they're trying to hang out with this lady. But I think we're on time.
Yeah. Just echo that. One of the themes is Betsy did not ask permission. None of us need to ask permission to do what we think captures our imagination and is regenerative. Like, follow the energy, feed what you want, right? And I wanted to close if all of us could talk to the next generation and what you have, because Betsy has a lot of stuff to say to the next generation. But my exhortation is just soil as a community, and I'm going to quote one of my intellectual crushes, Nikki Silvestri, about how soil and a community is about increasing the complexity and number of connections and relationships that we have with each other. And complexity comes with friction and conflict and compost and failure, and all of that is part of it. So if any people here feel like they are not part of the community or on the sidelines, you belong, you are wanted here, you are absolutely needed here, and people outside of the room too are wanted and needed, and we need to increase the complexity and number of interconnected relationships with each other. So, and when that happens, when we make pore space, we don't compact, right? Soil rises because you grow soil, so we will rise together when we do that.
Let me tell you that my grandson is 25 years old now, and he just got married a few months ago, and he is an awesome kid because he's been eating all of our good food.
Oh my God, I can't top that. But what's interesting to me is how often we worry about what the neighbors think, and they think you're weird, so just get on with it anyway. And one of the most successful behavior change agents I ever met was this dairy farmer who used to go down to the pub every night and rave about what he was doing, how those other people were idiots because how much are you spending, and this is how much money I'm making, and my cows are doing this and milking that. There's 16 regenerative operations on his one road because he did not care what they thought. He was more than happy to kind of stand up. And I think what you'll be surprised by is the number of people in your community already doing this and not talking about it because they are worried that you're going to think they're weird. So yeah, you are.
So I just admit it. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for hanging out. I thought you'd be long gone at the bar, so I really appreciate you here.
Thank you all so much. Let's give them a warm round of applause. Thank you for such a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
I need some help.
Here, I'm going to unclip you here.
Okay. All right.
Thank you all. I hope you have a really lovely evening. We will begin again in the morning at 8 o'clock. We have one more roundtable session, and then we have some fantastic workshops tomorrow. Hope you all sleep well, and we'll see you in the morning. Good night.